As you know, I've been on tour all over the country talking about my new book for families, The Wise Men Who Found Christmas. I recently made a stop at the Reagan Library in Simi Valley. I sat down with the executive director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation, John Hybush, to discuss the book and the real wise men who found Christmas. We had a great conversation. Here are some highlights.
Raymond, okay, here's one of my favorite passages from the Bible, Matthew 28, 18 to 20. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. I wonder, when you write books like this, do you see yourself spreading the word, as it were, in the modern day?
Well, I'll tell you, my first obligation when I start any project is, who am I writing it for? And I try to write for a particular audience. And I always ask myself before I start, because there are lots of ideas that come to me, and there's no audience for those works, or I don't see it yet, or I haven't figured the story out. So my first obligation is to entertain my audience, and I write with them in mind. Certainly, in the dark times that we find ourselves in. And I have been asked to write any number of books about politics, the other religious figures I won't mention, lots of people that, frankly, I consider a drag. I don't need to contribute to the darkness of the world. I'm trying to bring something with hope, and I hope some inspiration. And for me, when I started researching this story, because I wrote a book a few years ago called The Spider Who Saved Christmas, which is just an old Eastern European legend. I dug it out, I refashioned it. You were kind enough to have me here then. So that was kind of a legend that I think casts new light on one of the cracks in the gospel. It's kind of a quiet moment that we just don't know what happened between the child being born in Bethlehem and then the flight to Egypt. What happened in between there? That story kind of illuminates what might have happened. But in the case of the wise men, when I started researching them, John, everything I imagined I knew was wrong. It historically did not line up. How many wise men do you think there were? 3? No. Gospel mentions 3 gifts, not 3 wise men. Gospel is silent on the number of wise men. So right there I went, wait a minute, I thought there were 3 of these guys. Well, there are Coptic manuscripts that say there were 60 wise men. The Syrians and Armenian, those churches believe there were 12 wise men. So I kind of split the difference. I have 12 in the opening spread of this, with 3 leads that you care about. When you dig in, you realize, you mentioned it in the intro, it's important that we reconnect to the reality of what this was about. And I thought if the Gospel of Matthew begins with these wise men, there had to be a reason that he's the only gospel that starts with it. The wise men don't appear in any other gospel, just Matthew. Why? Why are they there? What are they meant to convey? And who were they? Were they historic? So those were the questions I began with, and it took me 8 months to kind of unravel who they were, what they meant, and then once I saw it all, I said, oh, this is an adventure story. This is a buddy film. And it's high stakes, and it's dangerous, and they're taking their lives into their hands, and they're pursuing truth recklessly in some cases. And I think that relates to all of us. It's a pursuit of truth, no matter where it leads. That's the lesson of the wise men. But I originally was going to write this as a chapter book, and as I did that, I said, but I'm cutting the audience down. The families gather around this story every year. I want to open it up to 104-year-olds and 4-year-olds. So how do I do that? Picture book. That was it. So that's how we came up with this platform to convey what is actually a very complex and fascinating story to me.
Is it that, the average person, we 3 kings of Orient are.
Right.
I wonder, is it because this tale is, in particular, is caught up with all these fictional elements that you thought you should go after this one?
Well, I thought I was going to write a story about 3 kings from 3 different kingdoms who went to see the Christ child and brought him gold and frankincense and myrrh. right? We three kings of Orient are. We all know the song. Turns out the song is completely wrong. There are not three, they were not kings, and they did not come from the Far East. They are from the Orient, but what does Orient mean? East. The immediate East. When you read Clement of Rome and Justin Martyr, first century, they all say the wise men came from Arabia. What was the capital of Arabia at the time? Current-day Petra, the kingdom of Nabateh. Well, I'm already hooked. I thought, oh God, the kingdom of Nabateh. I love it. Let's go. Where's Nabateh? Who are these people? So when you start digging, it all kind of falls into place. And then once I understood the political ramifications, I said, then I realized it was an adventure. And there are dangerous turns. There may have been a religious compulsion on the part of these wise men, these magi. We can discuss that in a little bit. I don't think they just went to bring gifts to a child. There's something far more profound happening here. And once I figured that out, I had to kind of, all I want to do with this is tell a fascinating, fun tale for the family that opens up the possibilities of who these guys were. Look, some of this is theoretical, and I'll be very honest with the things I think are theoretical. But what's historic, we have to mark and set so people understand where they came from, why they were going to this child, and what they meant to accomplish. And I just think it speaks to all of our lives. As I pull back from the story, John, I thought, we don't pursue God so much as God pursues us. And that's what happens with these wise men. It's through their natural passions. It's through their natural desires, the things that fascinated them, the stars and the prophecies. It's through those things that he reached them and moved them to action. We're all called in the same way, right now. We're all called through the things we love, the things we're naturally drawn to, the things our heart rests on. He pursues you through those. And I love the allegory of the star, which is there. They follow the star, and then it goes out. Then they're in the darkness, and they have to go on faith through much of the journey. And then way down the path, they reach Bethlehem, and the star reappears. What was it? What did they see? All of that we can speculate on forever. There's 1,000 theories. The most important thing is they had their eyes always looking up. They were beyond the things of the world, the earthly things. They were looking for the unseen. A little product placement, seen and unseen there, but they're always looking for the unseen. And we have to keep our gaze on the higher things, because otherwise these lower things will drag you down and destroy you. And you'll miss your calling.
I knew you would bring it. He always brings these tales alive. It's just...
You're sweet. Thank you.
You talk about this book being a book for family, a book for children. Christmas is a time for children. Is that why you chose to speak through the animals that were, an animal was narrating this book?
Don't give away spoilers, John. That's the big reveal in the last spread. You're already telling the whole book. That's like saying who did it on the Nile. No, we don't want to know. Let Perot figure it out.
Now, I didn't say which animals.
Yes.
But children love it when animals talk.
Look,
right?
I'm trying to, when I write, an editor friend of mine gave me a quote years ago, and she said, when you write, you really write like L. Frank Baum. L. Frank Baum wrote The Wizard of Oz. And I said, why do you say that? I don't write about lions or tin men. She said, no. L. Frank Baum said, I write for the young and the young at heart. And I do write for the young and the young at heart. I'm writing for a couple of audiences here. The child today and that child when he's grown. And I figured that out when I became a parent because, as you parents get misty-eyed thinking about it, the stories of childhood particularly, when you return to them as a grown-up child, now I'm going to cry. When I read Peter Pan to my kids, I wept through the whole end of the book. Every time I read it, I wept to them. And I'm like, and I kept asking myself, why are you getting so emotional about this book? Well, my mother read Peter Pan to me. She took me to see Sandy Duncan in the production when it came to the Sanger Theater.
Me too. Me too.
And there's a very sweet memory I have of, and again, it's all of this. Book stories, good stories, they capture not only a piece of our heart when we're young, but they gather up memories of that time and they hold them. And when you go to them again, they're reopened. And that's the beauty of holidays and Christmas stories. So I take all of this very seriously when I write it.
Yeah.
And I'm writing for different levels. There are going to be people who connect with Melchior, who has a side ailment and is still, despite his infirmity, is racing toward the light. And his line throughout the book is, we have to follow the light. But we have to follow the light. And the other guys think he's out of his mind. But that's what his calling is. He won't let it go. And I just think it's important to reach the entire family if you're writing for them. And I am. I'm writing for multiple levels. And I love that families share these books with each other, because Mama and Grandma will have a different take that they can share with the child, and that child often has a very different take that opens up and broadens the story we think we're receiving. And you see it anew through their eyes. That's the beauty of writing for, they say children. I write family reads. I don't write for children. I write for little kids and bigger kids. Wiser kids.
I won't grow up.
I won't. Well, you will grow up, but hopefully you won't lose the kid.
Yeah.
You know, like my friend Jerry Lewis, he used to always say, to Jerry, I would say, Jerry, how old are you inside? He said, I'm about 5. And he's 18. But there was that kid inside of him that he kind of kept alive. We have to keep that child alive. We should keep that child alive. And through wonder and a sense of awe, and that I tried to weave in. And I got to tell you, the whole reason, if you really want to know the reason I wanted to do it as a picture book, it's this one spread. It's this one. And it's the first time you'll see the wise men on Arabian horses racing through the desert. I just loved this idea. Arabian horses were introduced about 100 years before Christ in this kingdom of Nabateh. There's a good reason they raised Arabians. But they would have ridden Arabians, not camels. Camels were for heavy packing and moving, big articles of trade. If you needed to get somewhere fast, you took the Maserati of the day. This was it. So I just love that they're all on horseback. So it's kind of it gives it a sense of urgency and life and zest that the solemn procession of the kings and the Kalumpy camels never appealed to me. I never liked that story, I have to tell you. And I always wondered, who are these guys?
Well, these merchants of trade, and as well at the time, when I was a child and was introduced to this story, and you hear this gold and frankincense and myrrh. What are these things? We know what gold is. And
yeah.
What is myrrh?
What is myrrh? Do you know? A spice. Yeah. Well, it's an anesthetic. They put myrrh on the sponge to give to Christ when he was on the cross. It's mentioned in the New Testament. So yeah, it's an anesthetic. So it's medicinal, but it has another purpose. And frankincense, of course, is just incense, which was burned throughout the Roman world because people stank. Look, if everybody smells bad, you light the potpourri. You got to fan it around and hope it covers it up. But there's a wonderful woman. I'm so glad you raised the gifts, because the gifts are huge clues for us as to the origins of these wise men. There was only one place, in the entire Eastern world at the time, Middle East, where these 3 articles were not only produced, but that the kingdom controlled the trade routes, the spice routes. That would be the kingdom of Nabateh, current-day Petra. They had all the spice routes. Myrrh and frankincense are tree resin. They are extracted from tree sap. Well, those trees only grow in Arabia. So if you're from the Far East, you're from Africa, you don't have frankincense and myrrh. This is where they came from. They came from Petra. modern-day Petra. The other thing that the kingdom controlled is the famous, infamous gold mines of Solomon, also called the mines of Midian. They were the ones who controlled that gold. But there's an interesting other take here, and I found this in my research. And again, this is implied in the book. It is not set in stone. There are two theories of who these wise men, magi, may have been. And a magi they're soothsayers, they're readers of dreams, they're astrologers, they are mathematicians, they are of a priestly caste, maybe Zoroastrian, which were the Eastern priests from Persia. The Zoroastrians they believed in a savior, by the way, that was to come. They were obsessed with lunar cycles, but so were the first temple Jewish priests, the so-called royal priesthood of Jerusalem. The order of Melchizedek. You Catholics will remember that name. It's mentioned in the Mass every week.
Yep.
The order of Melchizedek. Now, the members of the order of Melchizedek was that first temple priesthood. They were expelled. The first temple priests were expelled 700 years before Jesus. Where did they go? Arabia. In exile in Arabia. Very likely in Petra, and their descendants became consuls and counselors to the king there, King Aretas, who appears in the book. So whether they were Zoroastrian priests or Jewish priests, I believe they had that pedigree because they would have been focused on both the lunar cycles and the Jewish prophecies of a Messiah. The cool thing about the gifts, and I'm really condensing this, is a wonderful woman, Margaret Barker. I interviewed her. I'm doing a Fox Nation special, digging deep into all of this. So it's kind of a companion to this. So if you can't get enough, we'll give you the full story. Margaret Barker is an amazing woman who reads like 13 ancient and dead languages. She is translating the Jordan codexes, which are these lead books found a few years ago. She's translating them page by page. She's incredible. Margaret has a theory, and others share it, that these first temple priests, their descendants, are living in Petra. They are the wise men and the magi. They see the confirmation in the sky that a king is to be born in Judea. They go to their king and ask him to go see him. They take these gifts. Why the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh? The gold, Philo of Alexandria, 1st century, a contemporary of Christ, tells us gold was in the royal vestments of the priesthood, that first temple priesthood. Frankincense was burned in the first temple. And most importantly, and this only happened in the first temple, second temple, it never happened. In the Holy of Holies, the most sacred spot in the first temple, a jar of myrrh was kept, oil. Why? To ordain and anoint new members of the royal priesthood. So, let's just suggest, let's go down the path. When these guys, if they were indeed descendants of that first royal priesthood, holding the ancient ways, and men from the East in Hebrew translates also to men of the ancient times, interesting clue, if they are indeed members of that priestly caste of old Jewish royal priests, when they go to the Christ child, they are not just visiting him and dropping off gifts. They are completing a religious ritual and initiating the final royal priest into the royal priesthood, restoring the first temple. So when Jesus later says, I will destroy this temple and in 3 days I will raise it again, he's the temple. It kind of brings the whole thing full circle, for me at least, and for many others. As we learn more about the Nabateans, this first temple priesthood, it all fits really well. So it's a working theory. It's a good working theory, I think.
How much, the Persians, Greeks at the time of Christ, how much astral knowledge existed?
Well, you're right to point out there were different schools of astral knowledge. I've come across evidence. The first temple, the roof of the first temple in Jerusalem had astrological charts on them. So they were very aware of the power of the skies and that there were messages there. But there's the Greek school, there's the Babylonian school. Here's the neat thing about Nabateh. Now, the kingdom of Nabateh, because it was a trade center and they had incredible aqueducts, they could bring water out to the desert. That's why they could have a working city there. They were genius. It was a trade center, and like New Orleans, a melting pot. Anytime you have a port city, you have a very large Jewish population, but you have Greeks, you have Persians, you have all these other influences that are mixing and mingling in. So they probably had a pretty refined sense of these astrological events, informed by separate schools of thought on them. But what they saw in the sky, that's another matter.
Yeah, then I want to ask you on these astrological events.
Yeah.
So in reality, what was the Star of Bethlehem?
There are 1,000 theories. The one that I lean toward, I interviewed some astrologers, a Cambridge scientist who's weighed in on this. One school is that it's Jupiter in the constellation of Aries. Jupiter being a kingly sign, Aries pointing to Judea. Okay, that's how they interpreted it. Okay. Another is that it was 3 separate astrological events. A cluster of planets, a comet at the end that led them to Bethlehem, and the timeline fits for some of these events. There were these big astrological events in 6 BC, 3 BC. Yes, there were things in the neighborhood. But as I say, what they saw is less important than the fact that they were looking, they were seeking, they were searching for something beyond what they had in front of them. And whatever it was, it convinced them that they had to get on horses and go see and find this child now. And that kind of mad passion I loved, because there are multiple things going on here. And again, I only suggest this in the story. There's a heft of the political background in the story. But Herod was a killer. Herod was a murderous killer. What I didn't know is he had murdered, before our story starts, Herod had already murdered 3 of his sons and a wife to protect his throne. So when these 3 dudes show up on horseback with their gifts and say, hey, where's the new king of Judea? Herod's head explodes. He's looking for the knives. Where is he? Where's the kid? I'm the king. Where's the kid? Well, they don't know where he is. And that's why he has to call his priests and say, come here, come here. Where would this kid be born? And then he tells them what? Go and find the child, and when you find him, call me. I'll come worship him too. And the king of Nabateh would fully understand the murderous intents of Herod. Herod's mother was a Nabatean princess, so they were kin. And more than that, I didn't know this, 30 years before the start of this story, Nabateh is invaded by Herod. They're right next door to each other. So there was a lot of tension between these 2 kingdoms. So when the wise men come and tell the king, there's a new king being born in Judea, we think he's a Messiah, he says, okay, fine, take some gifts to him, go make Herod happy, go be nice, we can mend fences here. So there's a political mission they're on, but there's a religious component underneath it for them. And I love the idea of that double, because that's how life is. It's never one thing. It's 2 or 3 things you're doing at the same time. It's never as pat as, oh, they followed the star. Star went out. Star goes out in the middle of the trip. So they had to have something more than the star.
And then is there I think maybe you represented this pictorially, but so the light beams up from up to the heavens.
Yes. That's a little flourish of mine, I admit. We all take little liberties. There's a neat portion of the book where when they get to the house, they realize the light is not coming down from the star, but up from the house. Now, there's a little theological thing there. Benedict XVI wrote a beautiful book about the Nativity. In the middle of it, he says, the star does not guide the child or direct the child is directing the star. And I kind of liked that idea so much that we represent it in the picture. We kind of imply it other places, but in the illustration, it's very clear. But I love that idea. And it's amazing how children pick up on the visuals. You know, they're seeing all the little things, the falcon and the horse and the way the star falls and the baby. They see all these little details that the adults miss. But what I love about picture books is you really can tell the story on multiple levels. I mean, it's really like a little movie that you control the pacing of. But you want to you want to tell that story. There's a lot of language I pulled back. I edited a lot out because Diane is such a beautiful illustrator that I said, well, you can tell this better. And she did. So all the description of Herod I threw out because her Herod is so monstrous and fat and sloppy and horrible. I said, let's just leave her, let the picture do the talking. Yeah, look, I love him. Oh, he's such a big, he's not a happy guy. You don't want to go in front of Herod. Yeah. So but it's neat. It just changes our perception of a story we took for granted. And that's really what I try to do, no matter what I'm writing. You want to kind of shake up expectations or broaden your thinking about a topic. I will never look at those 3 guys under the tree again the same way. Never. I want them all on horseback. I want to get the crowns taken off their heads, and I want at least 9 more surrounding them. Mm-hmm. I'm lobbying.
There is likely 1 or 2 in our audience tonight, Raymond, who I want to write a children's book. I want to write a children's book.
Yes.
What is your advice to those that believe they have it within them to write such a book, to actually make it come true?
You can do it. First of all, it depends on who are the children you're writing for? Because I've written middle grade, but I still have a series at Random House I'm starting again. We've done 3 of them. I'm writing the 4th. The Will Wilder series, which is a middle grade Harry Potter-esque, he's my little adventurer. Will Wilder sees things others cannot. And on his 12th birthday, the shadows he's been seeing throughout childhood take crystallized form, and we realize he has a very important function in his family, and they've been waiting decades for this kid to arrive. Will falls into all kinds of misadventures, but it's a fun series. But you're writing that for 8 to 14-year-olds, and I write for my older crowd, but that's primarily the audience. This is geared to a younger audience, but I never play down to an audience, and that would be my big piece of advice. You don't write down to children. They're far from simple. They're far more complex than adults are. They see things and are sensitive to things, particularly the big things, the nature of good and evil, the beautiful and ugly things at play in the world. Children are very sensitive to that. So you write from that level for them. But I think you have to make a good yarn. You have to spin a good yarn. The audience has no obligation to read your work. None. I don't assume they do. You have to hook them and hold them. And I try to create a lot of cliffhangers in the middle grade books because I've got to get boys to read and keep reading, and that's hard. Video games. Watching my sons play video games helped me with that. Because those video games all have cliffhangers. If you want to move the story forward, you've got to play through a level, and then it stops, and the story continues. So I thought, well, I've got to kind of use that in a middle grade book and drop cliffhangers throughout so they keep reading. And you leave them hanging everywhere, so they constantly have to keep going to figure out, because everybody wants to know what happened.
Yeah.
But I think that sensitivity to kids is important. And the shape of it, again, this book, a picture book, makes certain demands on you. You have to underwrite, and each flip is a reveal. So sometimes you let the pictures do the talking, and you don't have to write as much. But so it's an odd, this is a hard form, I have to tell you. This is harder than a novel, for me. This is far harder, because you're collaborating with somebody, you're having to pull back, you change the story sometime. In the spider book, when she spins the golden web on the front of the cave, we just did a whole spread for that. So we see her working through the night, and you turn it, and wow, there it is, the whole golden spread with the spider in the middle. So you let the audience, it's a little bit like TV. You let the audience fill in the gaps. You don't have to tell them everything. They're smarter than you think. Bad TV and bad books try to scoop everything and feed you, force feed you. I never force feed. It's not worth it. You got to do your part. Why should I do all the work?
Okay. I want to fast forward to the present day, but before I do, because I have some people here are fascinated with you, and I have some questions about you.
I have some questions about them. Why?
So before I leap there, is there anything else you'd like to say about this really?
Only that the whole reason I wrote this story in this way was because I hope when it's over, if we can ground these figures we've taken for granted in reality, and I really wanted to rescue them from fable. They were lost in fable. The names, the three names, Melchior, Balthazar, Casper, the traditional names of these wise men, I kept those names because they're so familiar, but they were created in the 6th or 7th century by Venerable Bede. He just created those names. The names, by the way, just mean king in different languages. Melchior is Hebrew, Kaiser, Casper, Kaiser is German. The other is a dead Semitic language for Balthazar. But they all mean God with the king, the king is protected, and something else about the king. But they're just represented for king. Now, they may have said they were kings because they were members of the royal priesthood, the high priesthood, which makes more sense to me than they were kings. And so I wanted to rescue them from that, and in the doing, I hope, not only do the wise men find Christmas, but we re-find it, situated in a reality not unlike our own. A political reality where strife and death surrounds us, and a hopeful reality where light does not disappear forever. And I thought if I could capture that some way through a story, through a real adventure, that it would pull people in and draw them to this story, and hopefully enrich and deepen a big part of our Christmas celebrations, the wise men. And for New Orleanian, in New Orleans, the Feast of the Epiphany is the beginning of the carnival season. That's when we break out the king cakes, thus king cake. And that runs from January 6th. See, I'm trying to redeem January 6th. No more hearings. Wise men. Wise men.
Okay.
Maybe that's my real motivation.
I would like to ask our audience to see if you've got any questions
Mass
for Raymond.
interrogation.
He's not here that often, so I definitely want to do that for several minutes. Over here in the front.
It's just a little comment and maybe something for you to use because I'm sure you're on a California book tour.
Well, a little mini California book tour.
You talked about the king and how smart he was with the aqueduct through the desert.
Yes.
And I thought maybe you could relate that to Gavin and maybe he could get some information about that.
Yeah.
Now that is the most helpful suggestion yet. I'm going to go do a book signing at Newsom's house. Yeah, all about aqueducts. All about aqueducts. They did find a way to get water into the desert continuously, but I'm sorry, you got the 405 and the 10, and getting the aqueducts over it could be a problem.
Okay, we know about television, radio, and writing.
Yes.
What do you love?
What do I love? What do you mean? Bring the microphone
Is
back.
there a preference?
No, I mean, I actually, the truth of the matter is, I mean, because of my foundations, I love the theater. I love live performance. If I could, I'd just do this. I'd just do live crowds. But it's one handles the other. You need, TV is how you reach people. So I enjoy it, but it is a grind. And I do, the one thing, now you all are going to be, some of you are going to wrinkle your nose when I say this. I'm going to compliment Barbra Streisand. Don't leave. Don't leave. Barbra Streisand has done something brilliantly. She comes out with one project a year, and like groundhogs, she hides all year round, pops up once a year, and goes away. There's mystery around Barbra Streisand. She doesn't overexpose herself and therefore wear out her welcome. And that's why when you ask me, well, Joe, you should do a show a week, you should do 3 shows a week, you should do 4. You can tire people out. And I don't want to ever overstay my welcome. You got to know when to leave. I love informing people, I love entertaining people, whether it's through books or in person. And I feel called to do that. But we can't, Angela Lansbury, whom I knew a little bit, just died. And there was a great quote. And she said, there is such joy to be found bringing humor and light to an audience. Believe me, she said, and I do. She's right. There is great joy there in that mutual giving. And that's a rare thing in life, to be able to touch many people and lift them and give them something to laugh about or unburden their load for a little bit and inform them about important things. And when you can do that at the same time, it's more powerful. Because if I can get you laughing, I can teach you and share a lot of what I've learned. And there's no blockade left. You're very open. And that's part of what I do too. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Giving away I'm like David Copperfield showing you how the tricks are done. Sorry. But thank you.
We have time for just about 2 more questions.
I have something special to share with you,
Uh-oh.
Raymond. Thank you for coming tonight. 2 weeks ago on your World Over on EWTN, you highlighted a group of Carmelite sisters
Oh, yeah.
who were recording a CD in St. Joseph's Chapel.
Yes.
I live a block from St. Joseph Chapel
In Alhambra?
Duarte. Yeah, they're in Alhambra, but they also, they had a hospital for many years, which basically closed, and now it only serves the elderly. But the nuns, we have a walking trail, equestrian trail, that starts at Santa Teresita. That's where they are, Santa Teresita, the St. Joseph Chapel, and the nuns take their walks.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell me they ride Arabian horses. I was suddenly intrigued.
I'll have to
Okay.
find out. But that's where I walk my dog, and for the last 40 years, I've run into the sisters walking
They're dear
along there.
nuns.
But yeah, I'm familiar with that chapel, and when I saw them on TV, I thought, oh,
that?
this is awesome.
They're great.
Thank you so much, Raymond. It's just been
Thank
an
you,
honor
John.
and a privilege to have you, and we're just so pleased to have you back at the Reagan Library.
Well, I
Thank you.
love being here. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Raymond.
The honor is mine.
My thanks to John Highbush and all the folks at the Reagan Library for their hospitality, their kindness, and of course to all the great people who came out. The Wise Men Who Found Christmas is now available in bookstores everywhere online. My book tour rolls on with 3 stops remaining. I'll be at the Barnes & Noble in Brentwood, Tennessee on Saturday, December 3rd near Nashville. And on Saturday, December 10th, I'll be in Washington, D.C. at the Museum of the Bible. Then on the 16th, I'm going to New Jersey. Go to RaymondArroyo.com for all the details. And of course, you can always order the book from the EWTN catalog.